Picture this, your neighbors, your doors are left unlocked. Folks wave from their porches as you drive by.
Sounds idyllic.
It is, right? But now, picture that same place shrouded in fear and suspicion.
Oh, wow. What happened?
A brutal murder shattered the illusion of safety. This is Fairhaven, Minnesota, back in 1981. 81-year-old Myrtle Cole found murdered in her home.
Oh, that's terrible. So we're really digging into the dark side of small-town life today, huh?
We are. This case has remained unsolved for over 40 years.
It's chilling to think that sometimes answers just are elusive.
Yeah, for sure. And I bet it really shook that community to the core.
It did, and that's what we're diving into today. We've got old news clippings, a captivating podcast episode, and a whole lot of questions.
Lots to unpack.
What happened to Myrtle Cole? Was it a stranger, someone she knew?
Right. And why has this case lingered for so long?
Exactly. And to add another layer to this, the podcast really painted a picture of Myrtle as a beloved figure in Fairhaven.
She was deeply involved in her community. Someone who hosted Bible studies, fed stray cats, the kind of person who'd lend a helping hand to anyone in need.
Wow. So the opposite of someone you'd expect to be a victim of such violence.
Exactly. And it really makes you question the idea that, good things happen to good people. And it makes you wonder who could possibly want to harm her.
That is the question, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the biggest mysteries here, right?
Yeah.
The initial investigation was a whirlwind with multiple law enforcement agencies all over the scene.
I can only imagine.
They dusted for fingerprints, interviewed neighbors, chased down leads, but it seemed like every path they took just hit a dead end.
So was there anything in those initial leads? I mean, the podcast mentioned a parked car, a snowmobile, even some talk of peeping Toms in the neighborhood.
Yeah, it sounds like they had a lot to look into.
It does. It sounds like a jumbled mess of clues with no clear direction.
It does, and none of those canned out.
Really?
You have to remember, this was 1981, no DNA testing, no security cameras everywhere.
Very different time.
They really had to rely on eyewitness accounts, which, as we know, can be unreliable.
Oh, for sure. So what did they have to go on? Was there anything that pointed them towards a potential killer?
Well, there was one piece of evidence, a bloody fingerprint.
Ooh.
On Myrtle's pillowcase.
Okay, and this was significant because...
It meant they were dealing with a print that could only belong to the killer.
Okay, that's huge. Like one of those clues in a mystery novel that kind of throws everything into focus. Did they ever find a match for that print?
Well, that's where this story takes some twists and turns.
Oh, God, I'm intrigued.
They had two initial suspects, Jesse Dinkins and Donald Steinmeier.
Okay, and what made them suspects?
They left Fairhaven shortly after the murder, which naturally raised some eyebrows.
Well, yeah, it does seem a bit suspicious. I mean, you'd think if you were innocent, you'd stick around to clear your name.
Right, but despite that initial suspicion, their fingerprints didn't match the bloody print, and they were cleared.
Okay, so two down, and who's next?
Then there was this young man who claimed that a local named Steve Barry had confessed to the murder.
Oh, wow, a confession. So they must have been able to wrap this up quickly then.
Not quite. The police searched his home. They even found a couple of knives, but again, his prints didn't match, and he had an alibi for the night of the murder.
Oh, so back to square one with a bloody fingerprint and no match. Did investigators ever think that maybe the killer wasn't local? That maybe this was someone passing through, someone who had maybe committed other crimes elsewhere?
That's a good question, and it's something they definitely considered, especially given the other unsolved murders in Stearns County at the time.
Oh, wow. So this wasn't an isolated incident.
It wasn't, and because of all this, the case actually drew the attention of a detective who specialized in serial killers.
Wow. Okay, that's big. He must have been looking at some high-profile cases.
He was, and he came to Fairhaven to see if Myrtle's murder might fit the profile of any known offenders.
So he's basically looking for a connection. Was he looking at any particular serial killer?
He was particularly interested in Henry Lee Lucas.
Oh, I've heard that name.
He's notorious, right? He confessed to hundreds of murders across the country.
Yeah, I remember that. So what happened? Did this detective meet with Lucas?
He did. He actually went so far as to interview him in prison, hoping to find a connection.
Oh, wow. Talk about a chilling thought.
Right.
So what did Lucas have to say about Myrtle's murder?
Well, he claimed to have killed an elderly woman in Minnesota.
Okay, that's going to raise some flags.
It did. But his description of the crime and the location didn't match the details of Myrtle's case, and his alibi for the time of Myrtle's death checked out.
Oh, wow. So another dead end.
They even looked into Lucas's accomplice Otis Toole, but again, no match. It seemed like every promising lead just fizzled out.
So frustrating. It's like going in circles, chasing shadows, but never quite catching them.
Right.
Did they ever find any other physical evidence that could shed light on what happened to Myrtle?
Almost a year after the murder, a knife was found on her property.
A knife. Okay, that sounds like a major breakthrough.
It did initially, but the lack of blood on the knife raised questions.
It's like every piece of the puzzle they found just created more questions than answers.
Exactly, and that's what makes this case so perplexing.
So we've talked about the initial investigation, the suspects, the dead ends. What happened next? Did the case just go cold?
Well, the case remained open, but that initial frenzy of activity died down. Leads dried up. The public's attention shifted to other things, and the file on Myrtle Cole's murder landed in the cold case drawer.
But I have a feeling that's not where the story ends. There must have been something that brought this case back into the spotlight.
It didn't. The case might have gone cold for a while, but the embers of this mystery were far from extinguished in 2018. Investigator Kochevar decided to revisit the case.
So decades later, someone finally decided to dust off those old files and see if there was anything new to be found. Huh. What sparked this renewed interest in the case?
I think there were a few things at play. Firstly, advances in forensic technology, especially DNA analysis, offered new avenues for investigation.
Makes sense. Imagine the possibilities if they could pull DNA from that bloody fingerprint or re-examine other pieces of evidence with modern techniques. Yep. It could be a game changer.
Exactly. But it wasn't just about the technology. Kochevar understood something crucial about cold cases.
And what's that?
They need a champion. Someone who's willing to dig deep, challenge old assumptions, and keep the story alive.
Right. Someone to be their voice.
Exactly. And he became that champion for Myrtle Cole.
Okay, so what did Kochevar do differently? How did he approach this case that had stumped investigators for so long?
Well, he started by combing through all the existing evidence, the crime scene photos, the witness statements, the lab reports, everything.
Wow, meticulously going over every detail.
He was looking for inconsistencies, overlooked details, anything that might have been missed in the initial investigation.
So it's like putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle, but with some pieces missing and others that might not even belong.
Yeah, a bit like that. Did he find anything that jumped out at him?
Well, that's what I want to know.
There wasn't a singular aha moment, but Kochevar did uncover some intriguing details.
Like what?
For example, there was a canceled press conference back in 1981, just before the FBI was going to announce they had completed a psychological profile of the killer.
Hold on, a canceled press conference. It sounds like something straight out of a conspiracy thriller. What were they going to announce and why was it canceled?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? No explanation was ever given.
Really? So what are people saying?
Some speculate that they might have been close to an arrest, but something went wrong. Others think they might have uncovered information that was too sensitive to reveal to the public.
It just adds another layer of intrigue to an already mysterious case. So what about that psychological profile? Did it offer any insights into the killer?
That's another frustrating dead end. The details of the profile were never released.
It makes you wonder what they're hiding.
Yeah.
I mean, after all this time, shouldn't the public have a right to know what the FBI concluded?
It's tricky on one hand. Transparency is crucial, especially in a case like this that has haunted a community for so long. But then there's the need to protect the integrity of the investigation, even a cold case.
Right, because releasing sensitive information could jeopardize future leads.
Exactly, or even tip off potential suspects.
I can see both sides of that argument,
Yeah.
but it's still frustrating for everyone involved, especially for Myrtle's family and friends who still deserve answers after all these years. Did Kochevar manage to uncover anything that could bring them closer to those answers?
Well, he did something that proved incredibly effective.
What's that?
He brought the case back into the public eye.
Okay, how did he do that?
He did interviews, appeared on podcasts, even spearheaded a billboard campaign featuring Myrtle's photo and a plea for information.
Wow, a billboard. That's a bold move. A constant reminder in the very community where the murder took place. It must have stirred up a lot of emotions and maybe even some old memories.
I'm sure it did, and it led to new information.
It did.
The billboard, along with a renewed push through Crime Stoppers, resulted in a surge of tips.
So people were calling in.
Some were things investigators already knew, but there were a few promising new leads that warranted further investigation.
So there's hope. After all this time, is there a chance that Myrtle Cole's murder could finally be solved?
There's always hope. Cold cases are cracked all the time, sometimes years, even decades after the crime.
That's encouraging.
And Kochevar's dedication, combined with new technology and the power of public awareness, has certainly breathed new life into the investigation.
It sounds like he's determined to see this through to the end, no matter how long it takes. Did he ever reveal any theories about the killer? About who might have done this and why?
Well, one of Kochevar's theories is that the killer might have known Myrtle personally.
Really?
He points to the fact that nothing was stolen from her home, suggesting the motive might have been something other than robbery.
That's interesting because I was thinking the same thing. The level of violence,
Mm.
the fact that she was targeted in her own home, it does seem to suggest something more personal, maybe even a simmering resentment.
Right. And Kachavar has even speculated that the killer may have harbored just a deep-seated anger or resentment towards women in general.
Wow, if that's true, it adds another layer of complexity to the case. It's no longer just about finding a person. It's about understanding the psychological factors that could drive someone to commit such a brutal act.
It's a chilling thought for sure, and it underscores the importance of not just solving the crime, but also understanding the underlying motivations.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The initial investigation, the suspects, the dead ends, the renewed efforts by investigator Kachavar, and the lingering questions that still remain. What stands out to you as the most crucial aspect of this story?
I think for me, it's the human element. You have Myrtle, this kind, generous woman who was brutally murdered, and then you have her family and friends who've been grappling with this loss for over 40 years. And then on the other side, you have investigators like Kachavar who are just determined to bring them justice.
I agree. And it's not just about Myrtle's case. This story reminds us that there are countless unsolved murders out there. Each one, a life lost, a family left in limbo, a community forever changed.
It's sobering thought for sure, but it's important to remember these cases deserve our attention. And even if we can't solve them all, we can at least honor the victims and keep their memories alive.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? Why should they care about a murder that happened over 4 decades ago in a small town they may have never even heard of?
It's a story that reminds us that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the most seemingly peaceful places,
Very true.
and that justice, however delayed, is still worth pursuing.
And who knows? Maybe someone listening right now has a piece of information that could finally crack this case wide open. Maybe they remember seeing something unusual back in 1981, or maybe they've heard a rumor, a whisper of a confession. It might seem insignificant to them, but it could be the missing link investigators have been searching for.
That's the power of sharing these stories, right? Keeping these cases in the public consciousness, you never know who might be listening, who might have that one crucial bit of information that could finally bring closure to a grieving family and a community still seeking answers.
If you have any information about the murder of Myrtle Cole, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, please reach out to the Stearns County Sheriff's Office. You could be the one to help finally bring Myrtle's killer to justice.
And as we wrap up our deep dive into this chilling cold case, let's remember that image, that billboard in Fairhaven, a symbol of a community's enduring hope that even after all this time, the truth will prevail.
Myrtle Cole's story may be a cold case, but the embers of hope still flicker, and until her killer is brought to justice, those embers will continue to burn.